There are certain behaviors that seem harmless, even socially acceptable, but beneath the surface, they corrode trust, dismantle relationships, and chip away at the very respect people have for you. These aren't just bad habits, they are psychological traps, unconscious patterns that dictate how we are perceived and, more importantly, how we perceive ourselves. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, if we don't recognize these behaviors, they will continue shaping our lives without our awareness, sabotaging us from the shadows. And one of the most destructive habits that do this is gossiping. At first glance, gossip feels trivial. It's conversation, a way to bond, to feel included. But what if I told you that gossiping is not an innocent social exchange, but a destructive force that undermines trust in the most insidious way? I learned this lesson the hard way. When I was in college, gossiping was more than a habit. It was practically a ritual. My friends and I would sit for hours dissecting people's lives, laughing about their choices, and whispering secrets that weren't ours to tell. At the time, it felt like we were building a sense of belonging, sharing in something exclusive. But in reality, what we were creating was an illusion, connection built on the ruins of someone else's dignity. There was a girl in our circle, let's call her Emily. She was different, introverted, a little awkward, someone who never fully fit in. When I found out she had a crush on someone considered way out of her league, I didn't keep it to myself. Instead, I told my friends, and we laughed. The story spread. It wasn't long before Emily found out that her personal emotions had become the subject of ridicule. I will never forget the look on her face when she realized she had been betrayed. She stopped showing up. Eventually, she disappeared from our group entirely. At the time, I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that she would get over it. But deep down, I knew I had crossed a line. Psychologists have long studied the mechanics of gossip, and what they've found is revealing. Gossip operates as a form of social currency. The more inside information you have, the more valuable you feel in a group. On a subconscious level, gossiping gives a fleeting sense of power, making people feel important. But the paradox is that while gossiping may make you feel included in the moment, it ultimately isolates you. The moment you speak about someone behind their back, you create an environment of suspicion. People begin to wonder, if they talk about others like this, what do they say about me when I'm not around? The erosion of trust doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens silently, conversation by conversation, until one day you realize the people around you don't fully trust you either. Years later, at my first job, I found myself making the same mistake. There was a co-worker, John. He was hardworking, diligent, but quiet. He kept to himself. One day I overheard a rumor about John's health. It wasn't my business, it wasn't mine to share. But I did. I casually mentioned it to a few colleagues, thinking it was just another piece of information in a work environment where everyone gossiped. But John found out, of course. And I will never forget the way he looked at me. Not with anger, but with something far worse. Disappointment. A quiet, dignified sadness that cut deeper than any reprimand. In that moment, I understood something that I had ignored for years. Words carry weight, and once they are spoken, they cannot be undone. So how do we escape the trap of gossip? The first step is radical self-awareness. Before speaking about someone else, ask yourself, would I say this if they were in the room? If the answer is no, then it's a sign to stop. The second step is understanding the cost. Every time you engage in gossip, you trade long-term respect for short-term social approval. Which one do you value more? The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus taught, keep silence for the most part, and speak only when you must, and then briefly. Words are like arrows. Once released, they cannot be taken back. The third step is to reframe conversations. When gossip arises, steer the discussion in another direction. You don't need to call people out. You just need to be uninterested. Over time, they will stop bringing gossip to you. The way we speak about others when they're not present is a reflection of our own character, and that leads to the ultimate question: what kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be someone who builds trust or someone who erodes it? Because respect isn't just given, it's earned, word by word, action by action. The true measure of integrity is this: speak of others in a way that would make you proud if your words were repeated in their presence. That is the foundation of real respect, and that is how you break free from the cycle of gossip. Trust, once broken, rarely returns in its original form. When John confronted me about betraying his confidence, his words were calm, but the weight behind them was undeniable. He had trusted me to keep his personal information private, believing that I would respect his vulnerability. In a single careless moment, I had shattered that trust. Our working relationship was never the same after that. The shift was subtle. Less warmth, fewer conversations, an invisible wall between us that hadn't existed before. And it was entirely my fault. That moment was a defining lesson. Respecting someone's privacy isn't just about keeping secrets. It's about demonstrating integrity. People fight battles we know nothing about, and when we reduce their struggles to mere talking points in a conversation, we strip them of their dignity. The Stoics believed in the power of discourse, but they emphasized that our words should uplift, not degrade. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When we engage in gossip, we don't just harm others, we erode our own character. The truth is, if someone is willing to gossip to you, they are just as likely to gossip about you. What we condone in others, we invite upon ourselves. But gossip isn't the only habit that silently eats away at respect. Another is unreliability. At its core, being unreliable communicates one thing: your word means nothing. No matter how charming, intelligent, or well-intentioned you are, if people cannot depend on you, they will not respect you. Reliability is the foundation of trust, and once that foundation cracks, relationships begin to fall apart. I learned this the hard way in my early 20s. Among my friends, I had a reputation, one that I didn't realize was slowly working against me. I was the flaky one. I would make plans, then cancel last minute. Sometimes I wouldn't show up at all. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Life is busy, things come up, people understand. But one event changed everything. My close friend Sarah had spent weeks planning her birthday party, carefully organizing every detail. I had promised to be there, but on the day of the party, I got caught up in something else. Without much thought, I decided not to go. I didn't even bother to let her know until hours after the event had already started. When I finally called her, I expected mild disappointment, maybe a playful "you missed out." Instead, there was something different in her tone. A quiet detachment. She didn't have to say much. I knew I had let her down. And in the weeks that followed, I saw the real consequences. Invitations became less frequent. Conversations felt more distant. Our friendship, once close, faded into the background. And all because, through my actions, I had sent a clear message. She couldn't count on me. The pattern followed me into my professional life. Early in my career, I had a habit of overcommitting and under-delivering. I would take on projects, miss deadlines, and make excuses. I thought my charm and quick thinking would make up for it, but my boss saw through it. During a performance review, she didn't sugarcoat it. Your work is good when you do it, but your lack of reliability is a problem. People don't know if they can count on you. That was a wake-up call. Reliability isn't about grand gestures. It's about consistency. Every time you say you'll do something and don't follow through, you chip away at the trust others have in you. Over time, that lack of dependability creates distance. The fix is simple, but not easy. Be honest about what you can and can't do. Don't overpromise. If you commit to something, follow through. And when life happens, communicate proactively instead of leaving people in the dark. It's not just about valuing other people's time. It's about valuing your own reputation. But even reliability isn't enough if you undermine respect in another way by constantly interrupting others. At first glance, interrupting seems harmless, even normal. Conversations are dynamic, people get excited, and sometimes we jump in too quickly. But make no mistake, chronic interrupting is a form of silent disrespect. It sends a clear message. What I have to say is more important than what you're saying. For years, I was guilty of this. I believed that interrupting showed enthusiasm, intelligence, engagement. In reality, it signaled impatience, arrogance, and a lack of respect. The impact of this habit became clear when someone did it to me. I was speaking in a meeting, presenting an idea I had worked hard on, when a colleague cut me off mid-sentence. They didn't even realize they had done it, but I did. And in that moment, I felt exactly what I had been making others feel for years. Undervalued, unheard, dismissed. Young believe that what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. If you constantly interrupt others, you aren't just frustrating them, you are reinforcing a deep psychological pattern of disregard. Over time, people will stop listening to you, not because they don't hear you, but because they no longer respect the way you communicate. The solution is deceptively simple but deeply challenging. Listen more than you speak. Develop the discipline to pause before responding. Give others the space to express themselves fully before adding your voice. When you make people feel heard, you make them feel respected. And in turn, they will respect you more. All of these habits, gossiping, being unreliable, and interrupting, are easy to fall into because they are often unconscious. They stem from deeper psychological needs. The desire for social validation, the fear of missing out, the impulse to assert dominance in conversations. But the moment we become aware of them, we have the power to change. Respect is not demanded, it is earned through small but consistent actions. And the most powerful way to earn it is to embody the principles we expect from others: integrity in speech, reliability in action, and patience in communication. Because at the end of the day, how others perceive us is a reflection of the habits we choose to cultivate. Perception is reality. You may see yourself one way, but the way others perceive you is what truly shapes your relationships, your reputation, and ultimately, your success. I learned this the hard way. In one of my early jobs, I was eager, maybe too eager, to prove my worth. During our weekly brainstorming sessions, I would constantly jump in with my ideas, often cutting people off mid-sentence. I thought I was being proactive, demonstrating leadership, showing initiative, but my co-workers saw something entirely different. One day, in the middle of a particularly intense meeting, my manager stopped the discussion and addressed me directly. "You need to let people finish their thoughts," she said bluntly. "You're not listening. You're just waiting for your turn to speak." The room fell silent. I felt a wave of embarrassment, but the real sting came afterward. A colleague pulled me aside and asked, "You realize how dismissive you come across? It's like you think your ideas are the only ones that matter." That hit me like a punch to the gut. I never saw myself as dismissive, but clearly that was how I was perceived. And perception is what matters. Interrupting is not just a bad habit. It's a psychological red flag. It signals a lack of self-control, a lack of patience, and, most importantly, a lack of respect. The Stoics, who valued wisdom above all else, believed in the power of restraint. Seneca warned against speaking impulsively, reminding us that true understanding comes from listening, not from dominating a conversation. I learned this lesson again in a much more personal setting. One night I was out with friends at a bar. A close friend was opening up about his struggles with anxiety, sharing a deeply personal moment. Halfway through, I jumped in with my own experience, thinking I was showing empathy. I thought it would make him feel understood. Instead, he looked at me and said, "Can I finish?" The energy of the conversation shifted instantly. What I intended as connection came across as hijacking his moment. That night, I realized something crucial. Listening is not about hearing words. It's about being present, about allowing others to express themselves fully without interruption, without the need to make it about yourself. By constantly jumping in, I wasn't helping. I was undermining. Breaking this habit requires more than just intention, it requires discipline. Practice active listening. When someone is speaking, truly listen. Don't just wait for your turn to respond. Give them the space to express their thoughts completely before you interject. This small shift changes everything. It signals respect, deepens connections, and fosters an environment where people feel heard. And if there's one universal truth about human nature, it's this: people respect those who make them feel valued. The next time you're in a conversation, challenge yourself to listen without interrupting. You may be surprised at how much more you learn and how much more respect. But if interrupting erodes respect in conversations, then complaining does something even worse. It drains the energy of every interaction, poisoning not just relationships, but your own mental state. Complaining is one of the most insidious habits, not because it's loud and obvious, but because it seeps into our conversations under the guise of bonding. We tell ourselves that venting is harmless, that shared grievances bring us closer to others. But in reality, chronic complaining does nothing but pull you and those around you into a cycle of negativity. I used to be a chronic complainer. I didn't think of it that way at the time. I thought I was just keeping it real. A few years ago, I worked a job that frustrated me endlessly. The workload was overwhelming, the management was disorganized, and I felt undervalued. Instead of taking action to improve my situation, I complained, constantly, to anyone who would listen. At first, it felt good. It felt like I was venting, processing, even bonding with my co-workers over shared frustrations. But then I started to notice something. People stopped engaging with me as much. Conversations would shift when I walked into a room. My complaints, once met with agreement and shared frustration, started to receive only polite nods, vague responses, or quick topic changes. It took me a while to see the pattern, but once I did, it was undeniable. No one likes being around someone who is perpetually negative. Complaining wasn't just making me miserable, it was making me someone people wanted to avoid. From a psychological perspective, complaining is a form of negative reinforcement. Every time you voice dissatisfaction without seeking solutions, you reinforce the neural pathways that make negativity your default response. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, means that the more we engage in a behavior, the more ingrained it becomes. And over time, chronic complaining rewires the brain to focus on problems instead of solutions. You don't just become a complainer, you become someone who sees the world through a lens of dissatisfaction. Breaking the cycle requires conscious effort. Instead of complaining, reframe your thoughts. Ask yourself, is this something I can change? If yes, take action. If no, let it go. Train yourself to seek solutions rather than dwell on problems. And most importantly, be mindful of the energy you bring into conversations. People are naturally drawn to those who uplift, inspire, and encourage. No one respects someone who drains the room with negativity. Ultimately, respect is not something you demand. It's something you cultivate through the way you speak, the way you listen, and the way you carry yourself. Interrupting signals self-importance. Complaining signals helplessness. Both habits push people away, eroding trust and damaging relationships. But the good news, just as respect is lost through small actions, it can be rebuilt the same way. Speak with integrity, listen with intention. Choose to focus on solutions instead of problems. And above all, remember this: the way people see you is shaped not by your intentions, but by your habits. Choose them wisely. Negativity has a way of creeping into our lives, unnoticed, spreading like a slow poison that taints every interaction. At first, I didn't realize the damage I was causing. My co-workers, my friends, even my family, they all listened to my endless grievances, nodding along in agreement, sometimes offering their own complaints in solidarity. Misery loves company, after all. But over time, I noticed a shift. Conversations became shorter, invitations fewer, and interactions more surface level. The final wake-up call came when a close friend told me, "I love you, but you're becoming really negative. It's exhausting to be around you." That hit me hard. I'd always seen myself as someone people could confide in, someone they enjoyed spending time with. But in my downward spiral of complaints, I had become emotionally draining, a person others instinctively distanced themselves from. The Stoics had a simple but profound philosophy: focus on what you can control and accept what you cannot. Complaining, at its core, is the opposite of that principle. It keeps you fixated on problems instead of solutions, reinforcing a victim mindset that pushes people away. I saw the same pattern play out in a college group project. One of my teammates, Mike, was a relentless complainer. Every meeting he would go on about how unfair the workload was, how incompetent the professor was, and how pointless the entire assignment seemed. His negativity was contagious. At first, we all sympathized, nodding along. But soon, his constant complaints drained the morale of the entire group. Instead of collaborating, we just wanted to get the project over with. Our productivity tanked, not because we lacked ability, but because we had absorbed his sense of defeat. That experience opened my eyes. For the first time, I saw my own past behavior reflected in someone else, and it wasn't flattering. That was when I made a decision. I had to break the cycle. Instead of defaulting to complaints, I started practicing gratitude and focusing on solutions. When my job felt frustrating, I stopped venting and started identifying specific issues I could address. If I felt undervalued, I didn't just complain. I sought feedback, improved my skills, and made a case for a raise. When management was disorganized, I didn't waste energy lamenting it. I found small ways to streamline processes within my control. It wasn't easy. Years of negativity don't disappear overnight. But something incredible happened. People noticed the shift. My relationships improved. My professional reputation strengthened. I started earning back the respect I had unknowingly lost. I became someone people wanted to work with, someone they wanted to be around, rather than someone they tolerated out of obligation. Respect is not built on words alone. It is built on action, on the way we choose to show up in the world. Gossiping, being unreliable, interrupting and complaining. These habits don't just affect how others see us, they shape our own mindset, reinforcing patterns that dictate the quality of our lives. The good news is that just as these behaviors are learned, by choosing to listen instead of interrupt, to follow through instead of flake, to uplift instead of gossip, and to focus on solutions instead of problems, we not only gain the respect of others, we gain self-respect. So ask yourself, what kind of person do you want to be? The one people trust, admire, and want to be around? Or the one whose presence drains the room, whose words are met with caution instead of confidence? The choice is yours. Thank you for watching. If this resonated with you, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear this. Let's commit to being better, stronger, and more intentional with our actions.